Despite the promotional short Meet the Medic making Heavy out to be some sort of unkillable tank, he is actually a bit of an underdog in reality. However, literally mowing down groups of enemy players is definitely possible if you play your cards right, and boy is it satisfying to pull off. If you think Heavy is boring, or if you have a hard time succeeding as him, let me tell you this. I was in your boat about a year and a half ago. It turns out that I wasn't really giving the Fat Russian a fair chance, and when I did decide to play him, I was making some big mistakes that were holding me back from fully enjoying the Putis experience. So, without any further ado, let me start with the basics. Heavy has a few things that make him stand out from the rest of the cast. Firstly, he has the most base health in the game at a solid 300. Tanks in video games tend to be lacking in the damage department, but Heavy also has the highest damage per second in the game. At least on paper. I'll get to that in just a bit. So, because you've got so much health and damage, playing Heavy should be pretty easy, right? Well, some people would argue that Heavy is very easy, but if you have spent any time playing him, then I am sure you have run into situations where it feels very difficult to do much of anything. This could be due to Heavy's weaknesses, which have to be pretty huge to balance out his crazy high theoretical damage output and his impressive health reserve. The most obvious of these downsides is his slow movement speed. Heavy has the absolute slowest base movement speed of all 9 classes, and he also is one of the 3 classes that doesn't have any special movement mechanics. Basically, Heavy is slow as shit. Scout runs fast and can double jump, and half his unlocks augment these abilities. Soldier and Demo can explosive jump, Pyro has the detonator and the jetpack, NG can building boost and Wrangler jump, and Medic has a quick fix, which is actually pretty terrible, but it's relevant to this point. Only Spy and Sniper don't have a separate movement mechanic, but that is probably because if they did, they would be broken overpowered. I am aware that Spy has the Dead Ringer and the Big Earner, but I am not counting boosting your base speed as a special movement mechanic. I wouldn't say the Gru or the Eviction Notice give Heavy a special movement ability, but I'm getting ahead of myself talking about Heavy unlocks here. Anyways, the point is that Heavy is really slow, and to make matters worse, in order to deal damage with his primary, he needs to spin it up, which slows him down even more. Heavy also has the largest hitbox for hit-scan weapons, so he is hard to miss, and too slow to reliably dodge, especially when his gun is spun up. The resulting reality is that Heavy seems like a tank on paper, but he can and will get melted if he is caught in a bad spot. But wait, there's more! Heavy also has another less obvious weakness. His minigun isn't single fire. This may sound like a good thing at first, but single fire weapons allow the user to use map geometry to their advantage by staying undercover while they're not shooting and peeking out for just long enough to shoot before returning to cover. This reduces the time their hitbox is exposed to taking damage. The most obvious example of this is when someone is spamming out a sentry gun they are in range of. For the rest of this video, I will be referring to this technique as corner peeking, although one doesn't necessarily need a corner-to-corner peek. Props, payload carts, and shutter doors can also be used for similar results. Corner peeking with the minigun is not possible because it requires a sustained line of sight to deal any damage. Also, because you have to be spun up to fire, you don't even have the movement to quickly dive back to cover. At this point, you may be wondering how it is possible to be effective at Heavy when his greatest strengths, health, and DPS are essentially cancelled out by his built-in weaknesses. Well, like I said at the start of this video, you just have to play your cards right. I would say that my Heavy playstyle can be summarized into one single sentence. When you are able to encounter an enemy at close range that has no cover, as long as you are healthy and spun up, they will die. Every part of that last sentence was carefully and intentionally chosen, and it is so important to this video that I will repeat it again. When you are able to encounter an enemy at close range that has no cover, as long as you are healthy and spun up, they will die. Okay, that's a pretty long sentence, so let me break it up a bit. Firstly, as a Heavy, you want to be encountering enemies at close range. Like most weapons in the game, the minigun's damage depends on the distance between you and the target. Some weapons also deal increased damage at very close ranges. This is known as damage falloff and damage ramp-up, respectively. Heavy's miniguns have crazy high damage ramp-up at close range, but they also suffer from extremely steep damage falloff. This means that at mid to long ranges, your time to kill is much longer than the near instant time to kill at point blank. I think most of my gameplay clips I have been using so far have been decent examples of this concept already, but I will make it incredibly clear. This is the ideal range at which you will be encountering enemies. Of course, there are obviously going to be caveats, and I am not saying that you should never shoot anything unless it's point blank. This section is focused on simply generalizing the heavy playstyle. I'll talk a bit more about class specifics later in this video. Secondly, other than being close to a target, ideally you want them to have no cover. This is obviously going to be extremely map dependent, and you can only control your own positioning and not the other team's. However, you can use past experience and map knowledge to make this happen. In case it isn't clear, the reason you don't want your target to have any cover is because if they can break line of sight, your minigun can no longer deal damage to them. In fact, depending on the class, they may be able to win the fight against you if they are able to corner peek you, even if you're at close range. Again, Heavy has the most health in the game, but you will still die to 3 pipes or 3 point-blank direct rockets. Speaking of health, being healthy is the next part of the sentence. If you are close and personal, and you are shooting at an enemy that isn't in cover, that means the enemy can also shoot back at you. Now, since you have the highest base health in the game, and very high damage at close range, you will easily be able to win fights with most classes if you can satisfy all of the requirements in my single sentence explanation. However, if you are low HP, there is a chance you will end up dying before you can secure the kill. Also, since random crits are still in the game for some reason, you will occasionally do everything right and still lose because you got one-shot by a terrible, terrible mechanic that should have been disabled by default a decade ago. Don't ask me how I know. I should also point out that due to Heavy's slow movement speed, you will often start fights at full health, but over the course of the fight you will take damage. Whether or not you want to stay committed and keep looking for more kills depends a lot on the situation, but the idea is that you want to avoid committing in the first place if your health isn't good. Once you are spun up and in battle, often you have no choice but to stay committed. Speaking of being spun up, you will also want to spin up when you are expecting to encounter any enemies, especially if they are going to be close to you. This one seems pretty self-explanatory because if you aren't, you will have to spin up before you can start dealing damage, which gives your opponent more time to run away or return fire, or both. I need to point out that all of Heavy's miniguns suffer from a hidden debuff for 1 second after spinning up. The base damage and base accuracy will start at 50% of their normal values and ramp up for the first second of being spun up. This drastically reduces your time to kill, and therefore will also increase the damage you take in most situations because the player you are shooting has more time to retaliate. In many cases, especially when fighting other heavies, it can straight up lose you the fight if you weren't spun up for a second prior to an encounter. I like to say slow and steady wins the race because for this reason I am very conservative when it comes to spinning down. I spin up earlier than most heavy players, and I spin down only when I am quite sure it's safe, and even then I sometimes get caught off guard. Once you are aware of this mechanic, you will start to notice when it is affecting you because it feels like you are shooting a Nerf gun during that first second of reduced damage and accuracy. But since I'm on the subject of feeling like you deal no damage, I have to talk about some of Heavy's unlock options. A quick disclaimer before I say anything else. The information contained in this video is based off my own experience. Just because I say I think a weapon is bad does not mean that you can't use it and enjoy it. That being said, I also won't lie and say that an item is good just to appease the masses. With that disclaimer aside, let's start with the primaries. The stock minigun is fantastic and it is my personal go-to most of the time. Other than the Brass Beast, the minigun has the highest damage output at very close ranges, and this crazy fast time to kill is the main reason I love it so much. It doesn't perform as well as the Tomislav at mid to long ranges because its bullet spread cone is wider. This wider spread is typically a downside, but I actually find it to be really helpful when tracking scouts because it requires much less precision to deal damage. The Tomislav is probably the most popular minigun, and for good reason. It is completely silent when spun up, which is obviously good for stealth reasons, but it also makes listening for spies much easier. The Tommy spins up faster than all other miniguns, which ideally shouldn't really matter, but I'll talk a bit more about that later. Its tighter bullet spread means that Heavy is more dangerous at mid-ranges, while still remaining lethal at that sweet spot close range I've talked about already. The main downside to this unlock is that its damage output is worse than stock's in some cases, although it can also be better depending on the range of the engagement. While I think it is probably the strongest minigun if you are really good, there are some times when stock is better. The Tomislav also requires you to have better tracking to get value out of it because it is more accurate, which is probably the reason I gravitate to the minigun because my tracking isn't really that good. The Natasha is one of the weapons that seems like it would be really strong, but when you actually use it, you realize it is not. The main draw of the item is that it slows down enemies on hit. This is a useful ability because it makes tracking enemies way easier. On top of that, you get 20% damage resistance when you are spun up and below 50% health. Both of these upsides sound pretty good, but the downsides are devastating. Firstly, it takes longer to spin up, which isn't great, but honestly, it's not the reason this weapon sucks. Valve hit this thing with a 25% damage penalty, which is actually way more significant than it sounds. Basically, you deal no damage with this thing. Sure, it's easier to track scouts, but the extra shots you hit only really balance out the fact that you deal less damage. Scout is probably the only matchup that gets noticeably easier with the Natasha, mostly because your team can also shoot the slowed down Scout. Fighting other heavies who have the Tomislav or the minigun is usually a lost cause unless they are totally unprepared. Fighting classes that are normally pretty easy to track, like Soldier or Demoman, just gets harder because you have less damage. Even if you manage to win fights with this gun equipped, your time to kill will almost always be longer, which isn't great. Speaking of time to kill, the Brass Beast has the fastest short-range time to kill of all the miniguns because of its impressive 20% damage bonus. Keep in mind that this thing has crazy damage output, but its bonus is actually less than the Natasha's damage debuff. Anyways, just like the Natasha, the Brass Beast gives Heavy a 20% damage reduction when spun up and below 50% health, but it also comes with a 50% spin-up debuff.
This medic is being a chat and crossbowing me, which is making this seem better than it actually is.
While this increased spin-up feels sluggish and it definitely hurts the weapon, the biggest downside is that it reduces Heavy movement speed while revved up to a complete crawl. You may think that I would like this item a lot because I have previously mentioned I like the minigun mostly because of its damage, but I find that this weapon is just not good because of that spun up movement speed penalty. I'll talk more about getting value out of your movement when spun up later in this video, but trust me when I say that it is a much bigger deal than it may seem. Alright, a quick editor's note here. When I was getting footage for this section, I was absolutely shredding with this weapon. I still stand by what I said, because the Beast is way less consistent than stock and Tommy, but man does it feel good when it works. If you can get to a head glitch spot, or even if you just have a medic smart enough to aero tank you, it is incredibly powerful. I uploaded the games that I played to my second channel, so if you want my live reaction, go check that out. I'll put the link in the description. The last primary weapon available to Heavy is the Huolong Heater. As a trade-off for a flat 10% damage penalty and draining 4 ammo per second when revved up, the Heavy gets a ring of fire created around him and a bonus 25% damage to enemies that are lit on fire. Frankly, while I love the visuals of this weapon, it's just too gimmicky to be worth running in my experience. Even if you have tons of Pyros and manage to get value from the damage bonus, it only ends up giving you a 15% bonus because of the initial 10% debuff. 15% is a lot of extra damage, but it's difficult to get this frequently enough for it to be worth the extra ammo drain. I would say the only time I would consider running the Huolong is if I plan on being the cart bitch heavy, because that would mitigate the ammo drain, but I find playing cart heavy to be an incredibly dull experience. If you like to sit on the cart, then give this weapon a try, but to be honest, the Brass Beast would just be better in this instance. Moving on to secondaries now, the stock shotgun for Heavy is the same as every other stock shotgun. It's just a shotgun. Now, some of my fellow content creators seem to love running either stock or the family business, or maybe even the panic attack, all of which are available for Heavy. I find all of these items to be suboptimal, not because they are bad, but because they are not the sandwich. I am familiar with the arguments that assert that the Shotgun Heavy is actually good, but I disagree. Originally, I had written a whole dissertation about my reasoning here, but I would rather not go on a 10-minute tangent about heavy shotguns when this video will probably already be pushing an hour long. If I get enough comments, I will make that rant into a separate video. To summarize, I think the shotguns on Heavy are poo, and there are a number of really good reasons everyone switched to the sandwich when it came out. Getting back on topic, the sandwich is the best secondary for Heavy. You eat it, it restores your health, end of story. The reason I think the sandwich is so good is mostly just because you are going to be taking damage as Heavy if you are playing him optimally, and if you are not playing optimally, you will also be taking damage. You will take damage, and you need a reliable way to heal to full health, because if you aren't full health, you are missing out on half the reason why the class is appealing in the first place. Yes, I know that there are other ways to heal other than the sandwich, and I will be talking about those in this video, but the reason it is so essential is because it is reliable. I place a lot of value on things that are reliable because you can focus less on whether or not your team's scout will steal the health pack when he's only missing 5 health, and more on shooting the bad guys. You may think that the banana would provide even more reliability than the sandwich because it has a much shorter cooldown. However, I personally value always healing to full over being able to eat more often. The second banana is still the second best heavy secondary in my opinion. Another lunchbox item that isn't terrible, but also isn't great is the Delocus bar. If you didn't know, eating this thing will give you an extra 50 base health for a while, but it doesn't increase your max overheal. I really only bust this item out when I am being held hostage on High Tower, and I really want the cap to win so I can get my casual experience. Then, paired with the Brass Beast, it's pretty solid. Oh yeah, I was also running this item a ton for Scream Fortress 2025 when I was making my pumpkin jumping heavy video that nobody watched. I kind of figured that video wouldn't get as many views as my guide videos, but I'm really proud of how it turned out, so check it out if you like goofy TF2 montages. Other than these niche cases, I think the chocolate can still be somewhat useful, but only when you are already full because it only heals 100 health. Frankly, it just isn't worth losing out on the sandwich. Finally, we have the Buffalo Steak Sandwich. Basically, this thing makes you take 20% extra damage and locks you to melee only. It's worse than the previous 3 entries in basically every way, except like the sandwich, when thrown it provides a medium health kit when picked up, unlike the Delocus and the banana which give a small health kit. It's not worth using unless you are going for some goofy melee stuff. Speaking of melees, I'm going to speedrun the melee options because this section is running long. The Stock Fists, the Eviction Notice, and the Warrior Spirit are not worth using, so don't even bother. The Fists of Steel are my personal favorite because you can sponge a ridiculous amount of damage with them pulled out. Usually I use them when I am retreating. The Holiday Punch is a solid pick because you can use it to counter Uber charges. Other than that, it's funny to get a taunt kill on oblivious players, but the usefulness does not extend beyond these 2 things. The Gloves of Running Urgently are alright, but they are quite risky to use because of the health drain. Personally, I stay away from them because I like being as healthy as possible, but if you want to rock them, be my guest. They do enable some jumps that are not normally possible as well. I nearly forgot to include the Killing Gloves of Boxing. This item gives you 6 seconds of crits when you get a melee kill, and you can switch weapons to your minigun or your shotgun, and the crits will carry over. This sounds pretty good on paper, but in practice, it's not really great because you have to get a melee kill first. If there are clueless spies or something on the other team feeding you free melee kills, I guess this could be a good choice, but spinning down and going for a melee seems too risky to me. I never use them, which is why I nearly forgot to mention them. Anyways, that is all weapons available to Heavy Weapons Guy. As you will probably be able to tell by the end of this video, I pretty much always run stock or Tomislav, the Sandwich, and the Fist of Steel, but feel free to find what works for you. Let's talk about medics. I've gone on the record before saying that Heavy isn't an ideal pocket for medic, and I still stand by this. However, like pretty much all generalizations, there are exceptions to the rule, and I would be lying if I said I don't enjoy a good old-fashioned heavy medic combo to pub stomp every once in a while. It's just that your effectiveness as a combo heavy tends to diminish as the skill of the other team increases. If you have a medic who is more focused on pocketing other players, you should still try and get a buff whenever possible. Just make an effort to rotate and call for medic when you actually have a crit heal, because if you recently took damage, it will take over 6 seconds to get buffed to full at the base healing rate. Every class in the game benefits greatly from getting overhealed, but as Heavy it is extra helpful. Because of Heavy's high base health, he can get buffed up to a maximum of 450, which is pretty huge. Now obviously you are still vulnerable to Sniper and Spy one-shotting you, so you will have to think about your positioning, but whenever I get buffed I like to get aggressive to make use of the extra health, or it will eventually decay. Trading damage is good when you have 150 expendable health. If you have a medic who is dedicated to following you around in an attempt to recreate Meet the Medic, then you don't have to worry about rotating for a buff when you have crit heals. These medics are pretty common in my experience, and they especially love to Uber heavies regardless of whether or not there is a more suitable class around to take the Uber. Heavy Ubers can be quite strong, but only when the other team isn't simply able to run away to cover. If you are on the defending team, this isn't typically much of an issue as long as your medic pops it during a push and not just at a random time, but if you are attacking, it can be tricky to make a heavy Uber work. Then when you Uber, the opposition is forced to kite towards the rest of your team. Does this always work out? Definitely not, but like I said, Heavy isn't the best Uber target, but some of these medics are hellbent on Ubering heavies, so try and make the most of it. I'll mention this in a bit more detail later, but as you are getting healed, you can see your medic's health. Try and keep an eye on that, so if someone starts shooting your medic, you can turn around and help them out. Giving your sandwich to a friendly medic is almost always worth it if they are below about 100 health. If your team doesn't have any medics, then you will have to be a bit more careful managing your health. I've always said that health is a resource, and Heavy does a great job of exemplifying that. If you follow the formula I outlined in the playstyle section, you will find yourself trading damage a lot when you get up close and personal with the enemy. Because Heavy has more health than the rest of the mercs, these trades usually end up in your favor. Now obviously there are some ways you can mitigate the amount of damage you are taking while still getting frags, and I'll talk about that more in a later section, but for now let's face the reality. After getting a kill or two, you will usually need to heal. My preferred way to heal back up is with health packs. If there is a pack nearby that will heal me to full, I'll prioritize grabbing that instead of eating my sandwich, because then I can conserve my lunch and avoid stun locking myself with the eating animation. If the health pack won't get me to 300, but it will get me pretty close, I'll usually take the pack instead of eating still. Don't worry about taking the pack from a teammate, because you can always just give them your sandwich. This is the most efficient way to heal if you have 2 players and only 1 pack, because then you don't have to wait for the eating animation. If the health pack is gone, or if it won't heal me to what I feel is enough health given the situation, then I usually try to find a safe spot to eat my sandwich. To mitigate the chance of getting backstabbed in the animation, you want to put your back to a wall or corner. Heavy makes really loud and obnoxious eating sounds that are like a flashing neon light to the enemy team saying, "Look, there's a vulnerable Heavy here." So to avoid drawing unwanted attention, I would recommend timing a voice line such as "incoming" or "no" to cancel out the eating sounds. Most of the time, it won't matter, but this can and will save your life every once in a blue moon. When determining how much health is acceptable, my general rule of thumb is that anything over 200 health is typically fine, although if the other team has a lot of demos or soldiers, then I'm not as comfortable at or slightly above 200 because they can still two-shot me. There are other reasons you may choose to settle for a health pack instead of your nutritious sandwich, such as if you feel it is not safe to eat at the time. Like so many other things, this is largely up to your game sense, so you will get better at this as you play more. The other main resource that you will have to manage is ammunition. Unless you are running the hull-on heater, this isn't typically much of a problem since you start out with 200 shots. It is probably worth noting that the Tomislav actually uses less ammo than the other miniguns because of its slower fire rate, so that is one hidden upside of that item. Anyways, the only times I find myself running low on ammo is after I've gotten a number of frags already, but in that case, I usually need to grab health anyways. Usually ammo and health packs are nearby, so I just grab the ammo too. I consider it far more important to pay close attention to your health, but every once in a while try and take note of your ammo count as well. If I am over 150 bullets, I typically leave the ammo packs for someone else, but if nobody is around, I will grab them just in case. You can manage with even just 50 bullets or so, just try and grab a pack that someone drops as soon as possible. You don't want to be in a really good spot but run out of ammo and die because you weren't paying attention. Luckily, in my experience, running out of ammo is almost never a problem, since you will typically die or have to back up because your health is low far before ammo becomes a concern. For most classes, the resource management section would end here, but I would like to point out one final thing that I would consider a resource for Heavy: being spun up. Now, this may sound a bit weird, but let me explain. Revving up your gun takes time and costs movement, and both time and movement are very valuable. Knowing when and where to spin up and spin down is an integral part of playing Heavy, and I would argue that this falls in the category of resource management. For example, if you were going to swing a corner to try and get a kill, you wouldn't want to be revved up halfway across the map and waddle all the way to the corner, but you also wouldn't want to peek the corner without revving up first. Deciding the correct time to spin up to reduce the risk of getting caught off guard, while also maximizing the time that you are able to walk full speed, is a decision you will have to make. And if you decide poorly, it will cost you health and ammo, and maybe even your life. Speaking of important decisions, let me segue into arguably the most make-or-break aspect of Heavy. Positioning is obviously important for every single class in the game, however, unlike some of the faster classes who can either rocket jump or just run away at any sign of trouble, Heavy does not have this luxury, especially when he is revved up. For this reason, getting caught out of position is devastating as heavy. On the contrary, smart positioning will make your life easy. Before I get to the specifics for the Minigun Man, I'll quickly review some fundamentals that are important for all classes. High ground is universally strong for a number of reasons. Being up high makes it more difficult for most classes to hit you, especially soldiers. Height also gives you more control to pick and choose your fights, since many classes will not be able to scale whatever high ground you are standing on to force a fight, which is especially useful for heavy, who normally has no way to run away. For example, if you were in apartments on upward second, an enemy Pyro would have a hard time chasing you if you decided to decommit. They would have to walk all the way up the hill and through the stairs unless they detonator or jetpack in through the window. Also, being up high gives you more options to play mind games and find weird timings. Using the same upward second example, you can peek through the windows for a second to get a kill, and once the defending team turns their attention to you, you can back up slightly so you are no longer visible. Then you can re-peek it again after a second to get more kills once they've given up on looking at you. I find that players seem to lack object permanence, or at the very least have a staggeringly short attention span. Probably because of how much time they spend scrolling through TikTok or YouTube Shorts. If you have made it this far in the video, congrats! You don't fall into this category, but many do. Use this to your advantage. Another useful element of high ground is dropping down to surprise unsuspecting players. Not all spots that are up high have this option, since pulling this off typically requires the element of surprise. The spots where this is possible can be very strong, since an unexpected 300 health giant with a minigun is an apocalyptic event for the other team. There are a few drawbacks to playing on high ground. The main deterrent to just standing on the highest given point on the map is Sniper, which affects every class, but especially heavy. As usual, you will want to minimize the time you are peeking Sniper as much as possible. If you know the other team has no snipers, that's great, but this usually isn't the case. In a perfect world, you would have information from your team telling you where the enemy snipers are so you can avoid the sightlines they are currently peeking, but this will basically never be the case. Instead, you will have to rely on your own game sense and intuition to tell you when it is safe to peek an angle. On most maps, there are flank routes to help you avoid some of the egregious sightlines, but the flanks may not be possible to push. Peeking Sniper should be mitigated as much as reasonably possible without baiting your team, but it is an unavoidable fact of life that you will have to peek some angles. This is one of the main reasons I like to run the Fists of Steel, because they can potentially save your life if you hold them out when peeking Sniper. It is important to note that you should really only be peeking Sniper during transition periods where you are moving forward or retreating. Most good heavy spots are relatively sheltered from the main Sniper angles. Another important positioning fundamental is control of health packs. I've already talked a bit about using packs to manage your health, but when you are deciding where to position, take note of where the nearby health packs are. Controlling a pack during a fight can be extremely useful, especially since they give heavy the most health back because of its high health pool. Even just a small pack will provide 60 HP, and a medium pack will give you 150. If you play smart and don't catch an unlucky random crit, controlling a medium pack during a fight will give you an effective 450 health, or if you start with a buff, a whopping 600. Choke points are another fundamental item that are important for all classes in TF2. Generally speaking, you want to avoid lingering in choke points that are contested by the other team. To clarify, standing in spots like U-turn on upward third defense is fine generally speaking because blue team will be pushing into the main choke. However, if you are attacking, you wouldn't want to be lingering in the main choke point. Furthermore, I find that positioning around my team's explosive classes to help them comfortably lock down a choke is often very helpful. Playing near classes like Demo that deal a lot of damage will help them stay alive, and it will get you kills. That being said, try to be far enough away from your teammates so that you are not taking the same splash damage. Lastly, I need to briefly mention map control. I just hinted at it when discussing standing in chokes that are and are not contested by the other team, but basically you will want to try and keep tabs on where the front line of the battle currently is. This is especially important as heavy because since you are so slow, you want to avoid blundering into a live firefight with no means of escape and with your gun not spun up. Again, in a perfect world your team would be able to communicate this to you, but in reality you will have to rely on your own game sense and occasionally you will be caught off guard no matter how good you are. The final thing that pertains to all classes would be corners. Normally the spiel I give is about corner peeking, which is a topic I already discussed earlier in this video. When you are playing heavy, corner peeking tends to work against you because of the automatic nature of your miniguns. This results in taking a different approach to corners than most classes because if you allow yourself to get corner peeked, you will typically lose the fight unless the corner peeker misses key shots on you. Instead of talking about using corner peeking to your advantage like I normally would, let me explain how to work around soldiers, demos, and any other single fire class attempting to use a corner to spam you out from cover. The main way to prevent getting corner peeked to death is to be in a spot that the other team does not know you are in. If you are spotted by a soldier and you still decide to try and push him, expect to get spammed out. Unless you are willing to trade a lot of health to get the kill, which is possible depending on the situation, then you should probably just back up and try pushing another angle, or simply wait for an opening. I find that corners with transparent walls are some of the most difficult to play around as heavy, because it allows the enemy to see exactly what you are doing, which totally ruins your element of surprise and removes the guesswork in hitting splash rockets or stickies. It's worth pointing out that not every Demoman soldier will abuse the crap out of their AoE weapons, so sometimes you can get away with pushing a corner despite being spotted, but this decision is risky and largely up to your own discretion. Usually I throw caution into the wind at first when I join a game, and I try to keep track of the players who actually punish me for playing corners poorly. Anecdotally, players who can properly spam out a heavy are extremely rare, and players who attempt to spam you but aren't quite as precise as they need to be are still relatively easy to get the kill on. So, most of the time when I waddle up to a corner and swing it, I get away with a kill or two. The reason swinging corners works is pretty simple. Heavy has a lot of health and a lot of damage, so if the other team isn't paying close attention enough to either spam you out before you swing or to find cover, by the time you turn the corner, they will get shredded faster than they can kill you. Of course, unless they get a random crit. Peeking a corner as heavy is kind of like if a sentry gun had 300 health and could slowly turn corners. If the sentry's line of sight is broken, you aren't in danger, but you would really want to shoot it before it does get line of sight if you have time, or you would want to get the hell out of there. Hopefully that analogy makes sense. Another way to mitigate getting corner peeked is to push the corner with a teammate, preferably a soldier or a Demoman. If you can approach at a more acute angle than your explosive class, and you are spaced far enough away from them, any spam aimed at them will miss you. If your teammate has to retreat, you will have hopefully conserved enough health to peek into the corner peeker and get the punish. Basically, your teammate can provide you with suppressive fire so you can preserve your health and get to do what Heavy does best. A slow corner peek at close range with full health and a spun up minigun. As a general rule of thumb, you want to peek as your team is also pressuring from another angle. This doesn't really directly prevent you from getting spammed out, but your team will help draw eyes away from you and vice versa. So to summarize, I would say there are 4 ways to mitigate getting corner peeked. The element of surprise, tanking the damage and peeking anyways, backing up and trying again later, and getting help from your team. Before I can move on, I have a few things regarding corners left to talk about. Firstly, a very powerful strategy is to just sit and wait for somebody to blunder into you. I find that this is best done in a spot where, should an enemy realize you are hiding around the corner, you can attempt to swing into them to avoid getting corner peeked. Depending on the spot, this may not be an option, so if you get caught trying this strategy, then you can expect to get spammed out very easily. Another seemingly small detail I find to be extremely important when swinging a corner as heavy is how far into the corner you peek. This is only relevant if there are multiple enemies around the corner, but I would say it is important to try to peek as shallowly as possible to get the first kill, and then peek out further to get the next target in your line of sight, and so on. The idea is to minimize the amount of hitbox that is visible to the enemies that you aren't currently shooting to make the most of your limited health. Soldier and Demoman will still be able to splash you despite being around the corner, which is why I honestly consider them to be a much harder counter to Heavy than Spy is, but I am digressing. Adjusting how far you are peeking around the corner just takes practice, because obviously your opponents will typically be a moving target. Your opponents can attempt to strafe between you and the corner, but because you are so close to the wall, even though you are so slow, you can still move quickly enough to keep firing at them. Basically, this entire corner section should explain to you why I don't like the Brass Beasts, since most of what I have described is not possible due to the revved up movement speed negative of that item. I could probably ramble on about corners for quite a while, since I think the way that you play around corners is the difference between an okay heavy player and a god tier one. That being said, I will move on to one more type of map geometry that is worth mentioning: head glitches. Despite their name, you aren't actually using any sort of glitch or exploit. A head glitch is simply referring to the fact that Heavy's bullets come out of his eyes and not his minigun, so he can actually still shoot enemies when most of his hitbox is hidden. Again, soldiers and demos will still be able to splash you pretty easily depending on the spot, but being in a head glitch will greatly reduce the amount of hit scan damage you take. Notably, snipers can still headshot you because at least part of your head will be sticking out, and sometimes the upper part of your torso depending on the geometry and where the sniper is standing. Head glitches are one of the best ways to mitigate incoming damage, which, as I have already mentioned, is what typically ends my life or forces me to back up. Depending on the spot, as well as the sentry placement, you can use a head glitch to spam a sentry gun without taking any damage because the sentry can see you, but aims for a more central part of your hitbox. The payload card works as a head glitch for both spamming out sentries and hiding your hitbox from other players very well. Furthermore, head glitches are not mutually exclusive with most of the other things I have talked about. For example, you can use certain spots as both a head glitch and a corner to peek if there are stairs that are tall enough to hide your whole hitbox. If you start at the bottom of the stairs and slowly climb them, you are essentially corner swinging. This is one of my favorite ways to peek because you get the usual element of surprise of swinging a corner as well as the additional protection of a head glitch. You can also either crouch or move up and down the stairs during a fight to dodge incoming projectiles. Another multi-purpose spot is above the tunnel on Badwater First. Here, you can surprise players below you on the cart, and you can also head glitch blue players going for the health pack. Just be careful for snipers looking at you from White Wall. High ground itself can also function as a head glitch, since despite your whole body being exposed if your opponent were on your same level, the ground protects most of your hitbox from the perspective of the low ground player. When you combine positioning fundamentals like corner peeking with a head glitch and a nearby health pack, you start to get the super meta spots that you would see used often at a high level. Using Upward as an example, you have Apartments on second which has a health pack, a corner for cover that is hard to spam out for most classes, high ground that doubles as a head glitch, and a spot right below it that can be used as a head glitch if you drop down. If you are a new player who watches a Highlander cast, you probably wouldn't be able to spot all of that, but there's a reason why people who have spent thousands of hours trying to win stand where they do. Other upward spots that combine multiple positional do's include Playground on first with stairs for a head glitch, a medium pack, high ground, and cover from snipers in the form of metal walls. These same walls that provide you cover also give you a way to swing a corner onto unsuspecting players. You also have Catwalk, U-turn, and Shithouse on third, Desperation and Pub Spot on last, and so on. As a real quick, shameless advertisement, I upload full heavy games onto my second channel, so if you are looking for examples of someone using these spots that includes more context regarding the game state and my thought process on other maps, then you can go check that out. All of this is to say that when playing heavy, positioning is important, and when done right, you don't need a queue with a dedicated pocket medic. Since I have somewhat mentioned the topic of health being your limiting resource, let me talk about one of my favorite ways to reduce my damage taken as heavy. Obviously, every mercenary benefits from his enemies not seeing him, but as a heavy, if you can surprise your target, oftentimes they will not have time to react at all before they are dead. Flanking as a heavy can help with one of his biggest weaknesses, which is his slow movement speed that prevents him from easily getting to decommit from fights. This slow movement speed can also make it difficult to flank, but if you are able to find an opening, it can be destructive. Usually when I wedge myself into a good spot, I am eventually forced to back up to eat, or commit and inevitably die because health tends to be my limiting resource. However, if I am able to find a flank, I can oftentimes stay committed until there is nothing left to shoot at because I end up taking way less damage than if the other team was actually looking at me. When you are defending, you may not even have to move at all in order to flank, which sounds a bit weird, but hear me out. Sometimes, you can just hide in a spot where the attacking team won't check and wait for them to push past you, and then peek out when they are distracted. Under the Bridge on Phoenix First comes to mind, or the sewer area on Upward Second is literally never checked by anyone. It's impossible for me to define when it is good to flank and when it is better to go the main route. It depends on the game you are currently in. Like so many other things, it really comes down to experience and game sense. I will say that I tend to try a different flank or angle if other options aren't working out. For example, the side tunnel is a very strong angle for a blue heavy to flank into because he can catch players walking onto the hill off guard and then appear behind aggressive red players on the hill. If I am unable to get into side tunnel, I might try walking down the cliff area instead. If neither of those options work, the other team is spending a lot of resources watching their flanks, so maybe I'll just try going over the hill instead, or perhaps I can just push all the way through the main tunnel. Heavy is really strong if you are able to get into a good spot uncontested, so you can expect the other team to try and prevent you from doing that. By poking different flanks and becoming unpredictable, you will probably have better success than trying the same thing on repeat. Of course, if what you are doing is working, then you don't need to change it up at all, except if you are just looking for more variety. I encourage you to experiment because some of my favorite moments on Heavy happened because I was in a spot that I should have never ever been in. Personally, I prefer to flank more often than going the main route as Heavy, mostly because I don't want to eat all the same spam as my team. I've talked about split pressure in the past in this channel, but to give you a quick summary, you really don't want your whole team to funnel through one tiny choke point like it's Dust Bowl last. Instead, try and pressure multiple spots at once to split the defense's attention, and you will likely have better results. Since you have so much health, you can draw a ton of attention as a heavy to wherever you are peeking from. If nobody looks at you, then you will get free kills, so it is a win-win for your team. In most of these clips, I am able to pinch the other team as my team pressures from another direction. Again, the difficult part is getting into the good spot without dying or taking too much damage. Taking space when there are many players dead on the opposition, or pushing into an area you see a teammate clearing out will help you avoid dying before you get to where you want to go. Depending on the map and the other team, you may just be able to walk spun up into your flank. Upward Spiral on last is one of my personal favorites as the red team because most blue players simply don't expect for there to be a spun up heavy slowly crawling towards them. The stairs can act as a head glitch, and there is a large health pack you can play around. This strategy is far from perfect. It can be easily countered by a soldier or demo on high ground, but it is worth a shot because if you can get to this doorway healthy, it can be huge. It is worth noting that you can also approach this flank from clock. However, once your team loses control of tiles, it is much easier to go through the under area because it's a shorter walk and mostly avoids sniper. Hopefully at this point you have a decent grasp on how positioning and flanking can enable you to get frags and conserve your health. While I think that these concepts are the most important skills for heavy players to hone, there are other, less obvious ways to stay alive longer. As I have mentioned already before, both directly and indirectly, heavy is a very, very committal class. This means that when you are committed, there is not really an easy way for you to change your mind. This is mostly due to your slow movement speed, but also because the miniguns also take a second to spin down, which can cost you your life if you desperately need to run away. It isn't impossible to nope out of bad situations as heavy, since you do have some tricks up your sleeves, but I will get to those later. The reality is that most of the time, you are going to be going down like a captain with your ship. Sometimes you may actually be able to survive a seemingly unwinnable fight by strategically focusing down important targets before turning your attention to less direct threats. Basically, who you shoot first is very, very important. Most of the time, this just comes down to experience, since you typically won't have more than a fraction of a second to make this decision. To sum it up in just one sentence, you want to shoot the thing that is the biggest threat to you. This sounds very simple, and when you get a few seconds to decide, it's not hard, but again, in the heat of battle, it is easy to make a mistake. Usually, a spy within melee range will always take priority, followed by a nearby heavy if they are spun up. If the heavy is oblivious, you may be able to ignore him for a while, especially if he isn't spun up. Soldiers, scouts, and demos are also quite lethal at closer ranges, so they are next. I would say they are largely interchangeable, and it really depends on the person playing them. Actually, so does literally every class, but I'm ranking them assuming equal player skill here. Snipers are usually low priority if they are close up, but they can deal 150 damage pretty quick if they are good, so I would put them over NG and Pyro, who are next. The reason these two are low is because their damage per second is typically lower than the classes I've already listed. I would put a spy at mid to long range here as well for the same reason, since he can't just one-shot you. Finally, Medic is the least threatening class unless they are going for Ubersaws. This actually goes for most classes in casual, but anyone going for melees is typically worth shooting first because they are going to random crit you, and because your minigun does a shitload of damage at melee range. Speaking of dealing loads of damage, you also want to base who you shoot first off of who you can deal the most damage to. More specifically, you want to burst down players who you can kill the fastest. The mental calculations for this get pretty crazy pretty fast. To make matters worse, your enemies have legs and they can move around. A common way I am thwarted is when my opponents move in front of my stream of bullets, blocking me from finishing the kill on one target. If they get between you and your target, they can spread out the damage, and they keep their teammate alive and firing back at you. Other than having god tier aim, you don't really have much counterplay to this. Heavy is just very weak to getting double or triple teamed, and good players will coordinate together to ambush a lone heavy.
Executed with impunity.
To simplify things, I will say this. I believe that you should prioritize killing things that deal the most damage first. If at any point during the fight you realize that you are overcommitted and you are going to end up dying, that is the point you should start focusing on what you can kill the fastest. Basically, you go from, let me kill things so I can stay alive, to, if I'm going to die, who can I bring with me? Yet another question to add to the mental calculus you need to perform in a fraction of a second is determining how valuable the kills are if you are able to get only one frag. Let's talk about that. Trading is exactly what it sounds like. You trade your life for one or more opponents. I find myself going for trades very often on heavy, mostly because I do not really have the means to choose my fights and instead have to settle for taking down as many players as I can before I get sent to the spawn room. In the situations where you have made a positional error and you are certain to die, it is typically worth it to stay spun up and try to get any kills as opposed to spinning down and dying without a fight. However, there are some picks that are worth a trade for even if you aren't committed past a point of no return. These purposeful trades are usually better on the attacking team because you have faster respawns, but because heavy is so slow, a trade's value can also depend on if your team has a teleporter up. If I am on a map with super long rollouts and I have no engineers, I try to avoid trades as much as possible. What classes are worth trading for depends mostly on the player playing them. That being said, here's a tier list assuming equal player skill. The game state is important. If the other team's medic just used their Uber, they are less of a target than, say, a Demoman. Normally Demo is a high value pick, but not if they are running full Demo Knight. But if that Demo Knight is on Eyelander and farming your team, then it's actually probably a good trade. Lastly, let me just briefly mention teleporters, which I have placed in the S tier. To be clear, not all teleporters are going to be worth dying to kill, and most of the time I go for a teleporter pick, I also get 1 or 2 additional kills. That being said, teleporters can and will win games if you allow them to stay up all game. Engineer has an easy time getting teleporter value on maps like Badwater, which have long rollouts for both red and blue. Luckily, Engineer players aren't generally a creative bunch, so you can learn to expect teleporters in certain spots. I should mention here that sometimes I don't kill the teleporter right away. Instead, I wait for some poor soul to take it and get deleted in half a second. This is an incredibly greedy play that can backfire on you, and for this reason I either avoid camping tellies entirely, or I just get one kill before I destroy it. With that disclaimer out of the way, you can farm more than just one kill off of an irresponsible teleporter. As I have stated time and time again in this video, heavy is best up close and personal. I focused mostly on how to make that happen and what to do when it does so far, but this isn't the only useful thing you can do as heavy. Sometimes the map does not allow for this playstyle, and other times you might not have time to get to the perfect spot. In this section, I want to talk about mid and long range spam on heavy. When is it worth it to spam opponents from afar? Well, before I get to more complicated situations, let me start with my best case situation for heavy that I have outlined previously in the video, but instead of being at close range, you are at mid range. If the opponent still has no cover and you are full health and spun up, this situation is still decent for you most of the time. This is because the damage trade will likely end in your favor because you have more health than the target. The only time that mid-range heavy gets completely outclassed is if the target is a Demoman who doesn't miss, because Demoman's ideal range is mid-range. Your matchup against most other characters is still favorable for you, it is just likely that you will end up taking more damage during the fight than if you were at close range. Actually, you could make an argument that Heavy's matchup gets better against some classes at this range, namely Pyro, but also Soldier and Scout, because the damage falloff more negatively affects them. However, having good tracking also matters more at this distance, and if you miss, your time to kill will be reduced even further, again resulting in you taking more damage or potentially even losing the 1v1. Let's use the same example from the playstyle section, but this time against multiple opponents. If you are the only player fighting multiple enemies at mid to long range, this is probably going to end poorly for you. Heavy's damage output isn't great at mid to long range, and multiple enemies will usually be able to kill you before you get any kills yourself. Even if you are winning the fight, the other players can simply run away, and there isn't a darn thing you can do about it. Now, this does not mean that you shouldn't ever go for any long range spam. If your teammate is engaged in a 1v1 and you can't get any closer before the fight will already end, then it may be worth it to provide some extra damage from a distance. Also, during teamfights, peeking from another angle for split pressure is good. The main distinction in both of these cases is that you aren't the main focus of the opponent. Obviously, these situations require your team to actually do anything, which won't always happen. This is the main reason why I stick to my typical close range strategy I have already outlined before, but again, sometimes you are too slow to be up close, or perhaps your team just really needs someone pushing from the flank. If you aren't sure if a long range peek is worth it, ask yourself this. If I peek here, am I going to be taking more damage than I will be dealing? If the answer is no, then it is probably worth it. If the answer is yes, then the question becomes, if I peek this, will the health I am sacrificing be worth the value my team is getting? If you peek an angle and take 200 damage and only deal 20, but that 20 damage drops a medic, then I would say that was worth it. But, if you peek and deal 20 damage to a sniper and then get headshot and die, it's not worth it. Now, the last situation where mid and long range spam is worth it is when you are spun up and moving into a position for a close range encounter. In this case, you are being efficient by maximizing your damage output because obviously if you deal damage as you are going to where you are going, then that's more damage. However, long range spam does cost you ammo that is objectively more valuable when used at point blank. Furthermore, since the miniguns have tracer bullets that can be seen really easily, you are basically holding a giant neon sign that says, "Look here, there's a heavy over here." Now, if the spot you are going to doesn't really rely on the element of surprise, or if the other team isn't super aware, then fire away. However, if you get greedy and you get that extra 30 damage in at long range, and then lose the up-close fight because you gave away your position, that definitely wasn't worth it. This happens pretty frequently in my experience. Many of my heavy battles are won because I am aware of the other heavy due to his tracers. Lastly, I want to mention that because engagements at mid and long range will have a longer time to kill on average, this means that if you commit to them, you are spending more time laser focused on one target and not looking for spy. I have been conveniently ignoring spy for pretty much this whole video, but now I feel is an appropriate time to talk about some difficult class matchups. To be frank, the majority of spies in casual are very easy to deal with. Basic paranoia is enough to completely counter these guys. Spy checking teammates, watching for packs that disappear in thin air, listening for backstabs or fall damage, and just turning around at random are typically enough to counter the average spy easily. However, you will make mistakes occasionally and get stabbed. There is a decently sized population of spy players that fall into the category of hard to counter, and I will be mainly focused on that in this section. In my experience, good spies will usually try a 50-50 decloak on you with no pressure from their team, and if they get away with that the first time, they will keep trying. If you show them that you are aware by catching them out, they will typically do one of two things: avoid you entirely, or only go for a play on you when you appear distracted. The former isn't hard to deal with at all for obvious reasons, just keep being spy paranoid and you will be fine. The latter is much harder to deal with because, in my opinion, it is the most effective thing a spy can do. The class that can get behind for free can and should be attempting to make fair fights into 2v1s in favor of his team. Countering these spies can be very difficult if your team is picking their nose in the backline doing nothing, and they are leaving all the killing and spy checking to you. If you have a competent team, you can afford to trust them a little bit, but usually you will have to spy check for yourself. Like I said, sometimes you will make a mistake and get stabbed, but other times you can just feel it in your bones that you should turn around and catch the spy. I also try and pretend I am busy to bait the spy into going for a stab on me. Both of these counters basically just come with experience. Most of the time, I don't hear the spy decloak, I just know when to turn around from playing a lot. If you have a good audio setup and you are still having trouble hearing spy, you can try running the Tomislav. When you are firing, it's still pretty hard to hear the decloak in my experience, but the silent rev helps a bit. I also think that positioning can be an effective tool to mitigate your spy deaths, because if you stand in spots that give him lots of places to decloak and mask the sound, as well as a short walk to your back, you are going to get stabbed more than if you were in a position that is harder to reach from any solid decloak spots. I know I have briefly mentioned sniper sightlines in the positioning section of this video, but I need to have a brief section regarding sniper. Like I said, the Fist of Steel can save you if you get headshot, so if you have to peek sniper, try and have them pulled out. Spamming jump and crouch, swinging your fists, and spinning around make it more difficult for the sniper to hit you. Well, to headshot you. Not impossible, just harder. Other than these few things, there isn't much else you can do other than avoid the sniper as much as possible and hope that he misses when you are peeking him. The best way to counter sniper is to hold map control and lock down choke points to prevent the sniper from being allowed to continuously peek angles for free. This is a team effort and it is impossible to do alone. Let's move on to things that you have more control over. Most people watching this are already aware of what crosshair placement is, but if you aren't familiar, this is just referring to pre-aiming your crosshair at where you expect a target to be. In most shooter games, players will try to keep their crosshair at head level. This is true in Team Fortress 2 if you are playing sniper, or maybe Ambassador Spy who can headshot, but Heavy's miniguns do not deal extra headshot damage. Because of their random spread, you will want to be aiming for an enemy's center of mass. What this looks like in practice is placing my crosshair where I expect an enemy to cross into my line of sight, and tracking that location as I move around a corner. I would recommend aiming slightly higher than the center of mass, since if you are aiming too low, your target may be able to jump over your bullets, thus outsmarting them. In some cases, I think having really good crosshair placement makes a big difference on Heavy, but there are also situations where it doesn't really matter much. Firstly, and most obvious, you want to be turning around for Spy pretty frequently, so this will naturally interrupt your pre-aiming. Also, clearing sticky traps pull your crosshair away from where you are looking. I would say that crosshair placement is very important when you are spun up, but you should still look for Spy, and stickies are worth clearing. However, when you are spun down, it matters a lot less since you can't deal any damage until you spin your weapon up. Anyways, I don't really have much more to say about crosshair placement. It's important, but you can't really learn how to do it by watching a video, you just have to practice. I mentioned earlier that you can throw your lunchbox, and that it will provide the player who picks it up with either a small or medium health pack. You can do this by right-clicking with your food pulled out. Just note that enemies can also grab any snacks off the ground. This is most useful for healing a medic on your team, especially if they are the only medic because there is nobody else to heal them back up after they have taken a significant amount of damage. There are a few things about this mechanic that I need to mention, but I didn't want to squeeze it into the resource management section for pacing reasons, so here they are now. Firstly, if your secondary is on cooldown, you can regenerate it by picking up any size health pack. This will only work if you are full health. If you are missing any health, or if you are buffed and on fire, the pack will prioritize healing you or extinguishing you over giving your food back. Since health packs have a respawn timer of 10 seconds, and food items linger on the floor for 30 seconds, if you are on red team, it is worth it to throw your food on the ground with 10 seconds left in the setup, and then use the health pack to get it back. This essentially gives your team a free one-time use medium health pack, or a small if you're running like the Locust or something. If you choose to eat your lunch instead of sharing it, be sure to use the third-person view the taunt provides to gather information. Being aware of your surroundings will help you make the correct decisions in the heat of battle. Moving on, some people might argue that this title goes to the Gru, but I think that the Fists of Steel are Heavy's best item for getting out of a bad situation. As I mentioned previously, it is hard to pick your fights as Heavy because you are so slow, and deciding to run away typically involves spinning down your minigun, which is your only form of defense if you brought lunch. That being said, there will be times when you aren't able to push up without getting spammed out, or you just decide to back up and try again. In these situations, I pull out the Fist of Steel to mitigate the damage I take. The fact that a melee weapon gives you a 40% damage resistance by taking it out is just totally busted, and I'm surprised that anybody picks the gloves of running urgently over them. I mean, some of the situations I survive are actually just comical with the Fist of Steel.
I'm gonna die, but I don't even care, man.
I briefly want to point out that you take extra damage from melee weapons with the Fist of Steel out, but if you have a team providing some pressure as you back up, it isn't really possible for enemies to chase you just to melee you. If you don't have any help from your team, then the other team can just chase you regardless of what melee you have. Other than becoming a damage sponge, you can also use the Fist of Steel to build Uber. The fists cap your max overheal at 390 HP, so any medic who puts the beam on you with the fists out will build at a higher rate than if you were buffed to 450. You can also switch back to your minigun once their beam is connected, and you will keep the 390 health max. Only after the medic reconnects the beam will this change back to the regular overheal cap. Now, Building with the Fist of Steel isn't something you need to do super often, but it is worth doing when rolling out or in certain situations. Another tactic you can use to retreat is surfing. If you didn't know, almost all damage in TF2 deals knockback, and you can use this to your advantage if you are running away. Simply jumping and crouching will maximize how far you go. Just try to time it so that you are near the apex of your jump when you will be taking the biggest amount of damage. You can also surf to initiate a fight, although this is more rare in my experience, and it can be a risky play. When it works, it basically feels like a really overpowered jump rev. Speaking of surfing, this mechanic goes both ways. Smart players will be able to survive normally fatal situations because they jump and crouch to use your stream of bullets as a speed boost. There isn't really much counterplay to this, since by not shooting your target you are doing them a big favor, and if you wait for them to land, they can just jump again. Speaking of knockback mechanics, I want to cover some weapon-specific knockback that disproportionately affects heavy. The Force of Nature, the Loose Cannon, and the Scorch Shot all have built-in knockback that ignores heavy's inherent knockback resistance. These weapons are really annoying to fight against because when you are spun up and ready to peek a corner, they will send you flying and you will no longer be at your ideal range. Air Blast also has the same effect. Being sent flying will typically offset your crosshair placement and make tracking your target more difficult. This displacement often affords your opponents enough time to find a corner to spam you out, essentially losing you the fight. There isn't really much you can do about this other than killing the Pyro before they can airblast you, so my condolences when it happens. Alright, that is pretty much everything I can think of when it comes to heavy. I am sure there are small edge cases I have missed here and there, but this video is already long enough. If I missed anything important, please leave a comment for people to see. I don't usually beg for interactions, but this video took me over a year to make, so if you liked it, consider subscribing. Okay. I am sorry for the solicitation. Here are some funny clips I got during that year to make up for it.
I want to play Invite.
What are you afraid of?
Not that I'm afraid of, more like I kind of want to win.
You
And
know,
this
you're one
team
of those.
has a really good chance to win.
You're one of those players that doesn't play higher leagues because they just. Oh, that's disgusting to allow.
No.
Morally bankrupt.
Very much bankrupt. We don't ask about that. But,
This is the most ridiculous. I hate the Scorch Shot. It's so stupid. This is insane.
Are you Ubered and getting knocked back?
No, I'm just. Dude, that was. A spy. Hello, buddy. You know what? This is like a cheese spot that's definitely gonna work. Mark my words. Mark my words. Oh, there's a gun. It's ruining it. Fuck engineer. Oh, this is not good. Okay. No!
We can start. Heavy secret.
Or second.
Stems on boxes.
Chojo, can you
Sniper
throw
is
some
so
power
bad,
down?
that's
Can
what they have.
you open shutter? Can you open shutter?
Force.
Leave. Our soldiers.
Force.
I'm hiding.
Forward.
I see spies here. Yeah, spies on telly right now.
Oh my god. Surprise, Iku! Surprise, motherfucker! You blocked.